She said I was trouble, and somehow, I couldn't stay away. The first day at my new job felt like stepping into a world I wasn't entirely prepared for. My boss was efficient, polite but commanding, someone who could run a team without ever raising her voice. I was determined to make a good impression, but I had no idea that someone entirely unexpected would catch my attention before I even settled in. Her presence was magnetic. I first noticed her at a weekend family gathering my boss had casually invited me to, a gesture meant to help me feel at home. She moved through the room with effortless grace, laughter lightly dancing on her lips, and an air of quiet confidence that made everyone else seem ordinary in comparison. She wasn't flashy, but she had a presence that demanded notice, the kind that made you suddenly aware of every detail about her. Her hair caught the light just so, her posture perfectly relaxed yet deliberate. Our first words were brief, almost accidental. I knocked over a glass while reaching for a plate, and before I could apologize, she leaned slightly closer, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Careful," she said softly, almost teasingly. "You're trouble, aren't you?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, it was playful, almost like she was testing me. I froze for a moment, caught off guard by her directness. There was something in the way she said it, confident, intimate, and yet utterly nonchalant, that made my stomach flip in a way I wasn't expecting. As the evening went on, I found myself drawn to her energy. She wasn't just physically attractive, which, of course, she was, but there was an intangible quality about her, intelligence, humor, and a warmth that made people want to be near her. She laughed lightly at a joke I made, and in that small acknowledgement, I felt an almost dizzying mixture of pride and embarrassment. Her gaze lingered just a fraction longer than polite, and I felt the subtle, inexplicable pull of curiosity and fascination. There was a moment when our hands brushed as she handed me a drink. The contact was fleeting, but electric, a warmth spread through me that I hadn't expected at a casual family gathering. My heart rate spiked, and I had to remind myself to breathe normally. She smiled knowingly, as if aware of the effect she had on me, and the brief interaction left me both flustered and strangely exhilarated. By the end of the night, I was painfully aware of how much attention I had given her, and how impossible it seemed to ignore it. Even in casual conversation, every glance, every tilt of her head, every subtle gesture seemed charged with meaning. There was an unspoken intrigue forming, a delicate tension that promised complications I hadn't anticipated. I left that evening with a sense of anticipation, knowing, without fully understanding why, that meeting her would change the rhythm of my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. After that first weekend, seeing her became an unanticipated highlight of my days. Our encounter started as brief, casual interactions, passing in the office hallway, bumping into each other at the coffee machine, but each moment carried a subtle charge, a quiet acknowledgement that something unspoken was beginning to take root. The first of these, accidental, meetings left me oddly flustered. She was leaning against the counter, scrolling on her phone with a relaxed ease that contrasted sharply with the office's usual formality. "You're late," she said casually, but there was a spark in her tone, teasing rather than admonishing. Her words, simple as they were, made me acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her presence. I felt drawn to her, though I couldn't explain why. She had a way of observing people that made you feel simultaneously seen and slightly exposed. During another encounter in the break room, she caught me off guard with a question about a project I'd been quietly proud of. "So, how do you really feel about this task?" she asked, tilting her head and giving me a half-smile. It was playful, but not superficial, she wasn't just making conversation. Her attention was deliberate, as though she were studying the way I carried myself, reading between the lines of my carefully measured responses. Our hands brushed more than once, each time leaving an unexpected warmth lingering in the air. A moment as simple as her handing me a stapler or a cup of coffee became loaded with unspoken meaning. I found myself noticing everything, the subtle scent of her perfume, the smoothness of her gesture, the way her laughter seemed to fill a small space and linger in my chest long after it faded. She also enjoyed teasing me, pushing just the right boundaries to see my reaction. During one conversation, she leaned closer than necessary while examining some paperwork, her presence pressing softly against my shoulder. "You're impossible," she murmured, eyes sparkling with amusement. I stumbled over my words, acutely aware of the proximity and the electric tension that seemed to hum in the space between us. Her teasing was gentle but intentional, and it left me both exhilarated and nervous. Even outside of the office, our paths seemed to cross in ways that felt almost deliberate. A bookstore, a cafe, or a quiet corner of the park, she would appear, always with that effortless poise, always aware of the subtle impact she had. Every encounter became a dance of glances and fleeting touches, a careful balance of restraint and curiosity. By the end of these initial encounters, I realized I was both captivated and slightly disoriented. Her confidence, humor, and subtle attention left me thinking about her long after our interactions ended. There was an unspoken promise in her playful remarks and lingering touches, a suggestion that the trouble she saw in me might just be something she enjoyed. And though I tried to focus on work, the magnetic pull toward her was impossible to ignore. Each meeting deepened a tension that was both thrilling and quietly unsettling, setting the stage for something I wasn't yet ready to name. It wasn't long before our interactions shifted from fleeting office moments to quieter, more personal encounters. One late afternoon, the office had emptied, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft clicking of keyboards in the distance. She appeared at my desk with a cup of coffee in hand, her presence immediately filling the small space. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked, her voice low, easy, and almost conspiratorial. Sitting across from her, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. There was something intimate about being alone with her, away from the casual chaos of the office or the watchful eyes of family and coworkers. She leaned slightly forward, elbows resting lightly on the desk, her eyes studying me with a mix of curiosity and amusement. It was as if she wanted to see beneath the surface, not just my professional facade, but the quieter, more vulnerable parts of me. She began sharing stories from her life, moments of frustration with work, subtle regrets, or even memories that hinted at a softer, quieter side she rarely revealed. I listened intently, feeling honored that she trusted me with this glimpse into her world. At the same time, I felt a subtle shift in the air between us, the unspoken tension that had lingered in hallways and brief touches now deepened into something more personal, more human. When I spoke, my words came with a careful honesty. I found myself revealing small truths about my own insecurities, my ambitions, and the awkwardness I often tried to hide behind casual humor. She listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement and occasional teasing remarks that made me laugh while also keeping me on edge. The dynamic between us felt electric yet grounded, a delicate balance between emotional closeness and the thrill of restrained desire. The physical space between us became charged without either of us needing to acknowledge it. As she leaned to hand me a notebook, our fingers brushed lightly, and a warmth spread through me that I couldn't ignore. I noticed the soft scent of her perfume, the subtle shift in her posture as she settled into the chair across from me, and the way her eyes seemed to hold mine just a second longer than necessary. Each detail registered with heightened intensity, leaving me simultaneously flustered and mesmerized. At one point, she tilted her head, a faint smile playing at her lips. "You're more observant than you let on," she said quietly, her voice carrying a teasing undertone. My heart raced. I realized that these moments, these private, unscripted conversations, were creating a bond that went beyond playful flirtation. We were beginning to understand each other in ways that weren't just about surface-level attraction. When our brief encounter ended, I felt a lingering ache of reluctance, a desire for more, tempered by the awareness of boundaries. But beneath that restraint, I carried a sense of warmth and anticipation that colored the rest of my day. The private conversations had shifted the dynamic entirely. What had been curious fascination was now evolving into something deeper, more intimate. I knew that the slow, careful pull between us was only beginning, and that every future interaction would carry the weight and promise of this quietly shared connection. After weeks of quiet, tantalizing interactions, the tension between us had become impossible to ignore. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared laugh seemed to carry a hidden weight, a silent acknowledgement of attraction neither of us had fully admitted. It was during one of those moments, a casual encounter in the office kitchen, that the playful confession arrived, turning our subtle chemistry into something tangible. I was reaching for a coffee cup when she appeared beside me, a mischievous smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You really are impossible," she said lightly, leaning against the counter, her shoulder brushing mine just enough to make me conscious of it. I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off with a laugh, the sound warm and low, reverberating in the small space between us. Then, almost in passing, almost as if testing the air, she said, "You're trouble, and I like it." The words hung between us, playful but deliberate, teasing yet intimate. I felt a jolt through my chest, a combination of shock, exhilaration, and undeniable curiosity. There was a confidence in the way she said it, an unspoken permission that challenged me and excited me all at once. I could feel my pulse quicken, and for a moment, I had to focus just to steady my breathing. From that day on, our encounters carried a new rhythm. There was a teasing boldness in her gestures, a hand lingering on my arm as she passed by, a deliberate pause when handing me a document, a playful tilt of her head that made me wonder if she noticed the way my gaze followed her. Every interaction became a dance, an unspoken game where proximity, glance, and touch conveyed far more than words ever could. Our conversations grew sharper, lighter, yet heavier with meaning. She would challenge me with witty remarks, testing my reactions, while I found myself navigating the thrill of her attention with a mixture of confidence and hesitation. A shared laugh could stretch a moment into eternity, a fleeting brush of fingers could leave my hand tingling long afterward. The subtle intimacy of it, the accidental touches, the lingering eye contact, the warmth radiating from her presence, became intoxicating. I began to notice the small details that made her presence feel unforgettable, the way her hair fell softly across her shoulder, catching the light, the gentle inflection in her voice when she spoke directly to me, the playful sparkle in her eyes when she knew she had my attention. Every interaction, however ordinary it seemed to anyone else, was layered with meaning. By the end of that week, it was clear that the playful confession was more than a teasing remark. It had shifted the dynamic, giving permission for curiosity, attraction, and desire to take root, all while remaining safe, gentle, and YouTube appropriate. The slow burn tension was no longer subtle, it was palpable, a quiet fire that neither of us dared to fully acknowledge but both felt deeply. Every encounter afterward carried the promise that something meaningful, exciting, and intimate was quietly unfolding between us. As the weeks passed, the playful tension between us deepened into something more complicated. Each glance, each touch, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The teasing words, the lingering brushes of fingers, and the quiet smiles were no longer just fun, they had begun to stir something I wasn't entirely prepared for. And with that stirring came hesitation. I found myself second-guessing every interaction. The age difference was impossible to overlook, she was confident, worldly, and experienced in a way I was still discovering about myself. I respected her immensely, and the thought of crossing boundaries, professional, social, or personal, gnawed at the edges of my desire. What would my boss think? What would she think? Could a connection like this survive without complications? Each question lingered, unanswered, creating an invisible barrier between us. She noticed. Somehow, she always noticed. During one office lunch, she leaned across the table, eyes bright and calculating, as if reading every flicker of hesitation in my expression. "You're thinking too much," she said softly, a teasing smirk playing at her lips. The words were simple, but her tone carried a quiet understanding. It was as if she knew the turmoil running through my mind, the constant push and pull between desire and caution. Even the smallest interactions became charged with meaning. A casual brush of hands while passing a document sent shivers through me, the warmth of her shoulder as we reached for the same item left me momentarily breathless. I noticed everything, the gentle cadence of her laughter, the subtle tilt of her head when she looked at me, the way her eyes seemed to linger, assessing, encouraging, teasing. Every detail amplified my internal conflict. Outside the office, the tension persisted. I caught glimpses of her at social events, her presence a reminder of the magnetic pull I couldn't fully resist. The thought of pursuing her felt thrilling yet forbidden, exciting yet daunting. I tried to maintain professional distance, but even that was difficult when the universe seemed determined to place us in the same spaces, the same moments, over and over. Our unspoken connection grew, paradoxically, both stronger and more complicated. She would test the boundaries in subtle ways, a hand brushing mine, a quiet tease, a look that lingered just long enough to ignite desire without igniting a scandal. And every time, I wrestled with my own hesitation, torn between what I wanted and what I believed was sensible. By the end of this period, the tension had reached a delicate equilibrium. I was captivated by her, intrigued by the playful danger she represented, and yet painfully aware of the obstacles that made acting on that attraction complicated. The push and pull, the magnetic draw toward her tempered by caution, set the stage for the emotional climax that was inevitable. It was clear that the slow burn connection we shared was no longer just about curiosity or flirtation. It had evolved into a deeper, more meaningful tension, one that demanded honesty, vulnerability, and courage to navigate. The tension that had built over weeks finally reached a point that could no longer be ignored. It happened one quiet evening after work, when the office was deserted and the hum of the city outside filtered softly through the windows. She appeared at my desk with a small stack of papers, her silhouette framed by the fading sunlight, and something in her presence made it impossible to focus on anything else. She leaned lightly against the edge of the desk, and I felt the subtle warmth of her body close to mine. There was a deliberate gentleness in the way she placed the papers down, her fingers brushing mine in a fleeting, almost accidental touch. I felt my pulse quicken, aware that this moment, this quiet, intimate pause, was charged with everything we hadn't yet said. "I need to ask you something," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant. It caught me off guard, there was a vulnerability in her tone that I hadn't expected. Her usual confidence softened, revealing a side of her that was quietly searching, quietly human. I nodded, urging her with a small tilt of my head to continue. "I like the way you challenge me," she said, eyes holding mine with a gaze that was equal parts teasing and sincere. "And I think I like you, more than I probably should." The words were simple, but they carried weight. My chest tightened as I processed the admission, the playful teasing, the lingering touches, the unspoken attraction, all of it was crystallized in that confession. I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and exhilaration. All the hesitation, the worry about boundaries, the fear of overstepping, melted away under the sincerity of her gaze. I reached out, careful but deliberate, and lightly took her hand in mine. The warmth of her skin against mine was grounding, yet electric, and I felt the unspoken permission to be honest in return. "I like you too," I admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. "I've been trying to keep it in check, but I can't anymore." She smiled, a soft, relieved curve of her lips, and leaned slightly closer. The distance between us narrowed, the world outside the office fading into irrelevance. Our hands remained intertwined, subtle yet profound. The brush of her thumb against mine, the gentle squeeze, the quiet steadiness of her presence, it all spoke of trust, of desire tempered with care. Her head tilted slightly as she laughed softly, a sound that felt like both acknowledgement and invitation. We shared a moment of quiet closeness, a pause where words weren't necessary. That evening marked a turning point. The playful tension that had defined our interactions became a shared understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of attraction and emotion. For the first time, our gestures, light touches, lingering glances, subtle smiles, carried meaning without ambiguity. We had crossed an invisible threshold, moving from curiosity and restraint into a space of honesty, vulnerability, and shared anticipation. As the city lights began to shimmer outside, we remained close, hands still gently intertwined. The slow burn that had been building between us for weeks had finally found its first release, not in grand declarations, but in quiet truth, mutual desire, and the warmth of a connection that neither of us wanted to let go. After the confession, our connection shifted in a subtle, almost unspoken way. The playful teasing and quiet tension remained, but it was now grounded in mutual understanding and affection. Every glance, every smile, carried the knowledge that what had been a slow-burn attraction was now an acknowledged, cherished reality. It was a weekend afternoon when we finally allowed ourselves a space away from work, free from eyes that might judge or misunderstand. We found ourselves in her cozy, sunlit kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint scent of her perfume. I was helping her set the table for a casual lunch, and the intimacy of such an ordinary task felt extraordinary. As I passed her a plate, our fingers brushed again, lingering just slightly longer than necessary. A small laugh escaped her, warm and genuine, and I felt a quiet joy at the effortless closeness we now shared. Sitting across from each other, I noticed how natural it felt to share this space. Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled, her hand resting lightly on mine on the table. I felt the gentle pulse of her warmth through my fingers, the quiet steadiness of her presence comforting and exhilarating all at once. Conversation flowed easily, light jokes, shared memories, and soft teasing, but beneath it was an undercurrent of intimacy, a steady recognition that we had crossed a threshold together. Later, we took a walk through a nearby park, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees. She slipped her hand into mine as we strolled, a simple gesture that carried a profound sense of trust and connection. Our fingers intertwined naturally, her grip warm and confident, yet tender enough to make me acutely aware of her care. Every step together felt synchronized, the slow rhythm of our walk echoing the slow, deliberate pace of our romance. Even in quiet moments, the affection between us was palpable. A hand brushed against my back as we paused to admire the view of the city skyline. Her head tilted slightly toward mine as she laughed softly at something I said, and I felt the comforting weight of her presence against my shoulder. It was a far cry from the teasing tension of our earlier interactions. It was steady, grounded, and deeply satisfying. By the end of the day, it was clear that our relationship had evolved into something lasting. The age difference, the initial hesitation, and the unspoken challenges had all been navigated with honesty and care. We had built something warm and real, a bond that thrived on playful affection, mutual respect, and quiet intimacy. As we returned to her apartment, hands still linked, she paused and looked at me with a soft smile. "You really are trouble," she whispered, echoing her playful words from weeks ago. I grinned, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "And I like it," I replied, our laughter mingling with the soft glow of the evening. In that moment, everything felt complete. The slow-burn journey, the teasing, the hesitation, the confessions, had led to a quiet, satisfying resolution. We were together, fully aware of each other's hearts, comfortable in our closeness, and ready to explore the shared life we had begun to build. The story ended not with fireworks or drama, but with warmth, trust, and the steady, human joy of a connection that had grown from curiosity into love. If you enjoyed this slow-burn romance and the story of unexpected attraction, hit the like button, subscribe for more age-gap romance stories, and let us know in the comments which moment captured your heart the most. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story of love, tension, and heartfelt connection.